At a public high school, a poor black student works as a janitor after classes just to stay enrolled. To most, he's invisible, but when he sees a white girl trapped in a sudden lab explosion, he doesn't hesitate. He runs straight into the flames. No one expected the quiet, overlooked teenager to become the hero they'd never forget, and that one act of bravery would lead him to a life more hopeful and extraordinary than anything he ever imagined. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. Jaden Carter had always moved through the world like a shadow, not because he wanted to disappear, but because life had taught him that being invisible sometimes kept you safe. At 16, he already knew more about struggle than most kids at his high school in Macon, Georgia. He didn't play football, didn't join clubs, didn't go to dances after school, while other students tossed backpacks in lockers and headed for the buses or their parents' SUVs. Jaden put on his gray janitor's shirt and grabbed a mop. The school had given him special permission to work a few hours each evening as part of a student aid program. It wasn't glamorous, and some kids snickered when they saw him emptying trash cans or scrubbing floors, but he didn't care. Every hour he worked meant less pressure on his mom. Deborah Carter, a woman in her early 40s with deep lines under her eyes and calluses on both hands, held down 2 jobs: waitressing at a 24-hour diner during the graveyard shift and cleaning office buildings on Sundays. She never complained. She just said, "God gives the strongest loads to the toughest backs," then kissed Jaden's forehead and kept moving. They lived in a tiny duplex apartment with creaky wooden floors, 1 space heater, and a broken screen door that slapped every time the wind blew too hard. Their neighborhood, just 10 minutes from the school, was lined with tired porches, rusted mailboxes, and dreams waiting on hold. But inside their little home there was warmth. Jaden's room had stacks of science books, borrowed from the library, and taped to the wall above his desk was a printed-out picture of the periodic table, covered in his notes. He didn't want to be a janitor forever. He wanted to study biochemistry and one day work in a real lab, where gloves were clean and people asked for his ideas. At school, most teachers liked Jaden because he was quiet and never caused trouble. Most students didn't even notice him. Except Miguel Reyes. Miguel was the loud, smiling type, always wearing worn sneakers, a baseball cap turned backward, and a hoodie with paint stains on it. His family came from Mexico, and his father worked in construction. Miguel talked fast, joked about everything, and didn't seem to care that he was poor or that people stared. He and Jaden had sat next to each other in biology class since freshman year, and slowly, without much effort, they became friends. Real friends. The kind that didn't need a lot of words. Miguel would sometimes walk with Jaden to the janitor's closet after class, slap his back and say, "Let's hit college together, man. We're gonna get out of here. I'll be the loud one, you be the smart one." Jaden liked that. That Friday it was gray and cold outside, the kind of cold that crept through windows and under coats. Clouds hung low and a light rain had started to fall just before lunch. The school had the sharp smell of wet shoes and hallway cleaner. It was the last period, and most kids were counting down the minutes until the weekend. Jaden had been asked to stay a little later to clean up after an after-school science program in the lab wing. That was fine with him. He liked being near the science rooms, even if it was just to sweep the floors. He liked the smell of chalk dust and metal instruments. He liked peeking at the glass tubes and charts left on the whiteboards. It reminded him of what he wanted, of who he might become. He was just finishing up the 3rd-floor hallway, humming to himself quietly, pushing his mop toward the end near the science labs, when he passed the open door of Lab 3B. He caught a glimpse inside. Students in goggles, burners flickering, someone laughing. He saw her for a moment. Emily Hastings, blonde, tall, quiet, usually dressed in a pressed sweater and neat jeans. Her father was one of the town's top doctors, and everyone knew her family was the type who summered in Hilton Head. Emily didn't talk much, especially not to Jaden, but he'd seen her in AP Chemistry. She was smart. Sharp but distant, like someone who always had somewhere better to be. Jaden didn't expect her to know his name, and she didn't. Not yet. But something was about to happen that neither of them could have seen coming, and it would change both their lives forever. Jaden was just finishing the corner near the end of the science hall when it happened. At first it was just a sharp pop, not loud, not alarming, just a strange, quick snap like the sound of a circuit misfiring or a plug pulled too fast from a wall. He looked up, still holding the mop, and squinted toward Lab 3B. That's where it came from. He heard it again, this time louder. Then someone screamed. Not a loud scream, just one of those surprised, startled kind of yelps. Then another, and then, without warning, it hit. A blast, a real one. A heavy boom shook the floor, like someone had slammed a locker shut with all their weight, only this was from the inside, deeper. It rattled the glass windows of the lab, and in the very next second, a flash. Orange, red, smoke. Flames licked the edge of the window like fingers pressed against the glass from the inside. Thick black smoke rose immediately, swirling in the hallway like something alive, fast and choking. Jayden froze, just for half a second, because his brain couldn't catch up with what his eyes were seeing. Then it did. "Fire!" someone shouted from inside. "Get out! Run!" The classroom door flung open. Students burst out in chaos, pushing, coughing, one girl crying, another limping. The teacher, Mr. Haroldson, was yelling something about the alarm, about chemicals. Jayden stepped back, gripping the mop handle like it might steady the floor beneath him. But it didn't. It all moved so fast. Miguel was among the students being rushed out. He saw Jayden standing still in the corner, eyes wide. He grabbed his arm. "Jay, let's go, the lab's burning, bro, go." But Jayden wasn't looking at Miguel. He was looking at the glass. Through the narrow side window of Lab 3B, past the thickening smoke, Jayden saw someone still inside. A figure, slumped, barely visible through the growing haze, was collapsed on the floor near the far table. Blonde hair, white sweater, one arm limp, not moving. Emily. Everyone else was out, the teacher, the students. The hallway was mostly cleared now, people yelling in the distance, a siren starting up far off. But she hadn't made it out. And suddenly Jayden's body moved before his brain could argue. Miguel saw it. He yelled again, this time louder. "Jayden, no, man, don't. What are you doing?" But Jayden wasn't listening. He dropped the mop, ripped off his janitor shirt, wrapped it over his nose and mouth. He backed up 3 steps, then ran, full speed, into the lab door. Slam. It didn't open on the first hit. He tried again. Bam! This time it gave way, just enough for him to slip inside. Inside the lab, it was hell. The heat slapped his skin instantly. Thick smoke coiled around him, stinging his eyes, filling his lungs even through the cloth. The air was heavy, acrid, burning. Every breath felt like knives. But he saw her, Emily, curled on the ground, not far from the fire that was now crawling up one side of the wall toward the ceiling. "Emily!" he shouted through the rag over his mouth, but she didn't move. Jayden dropped to his knees, crawled the last few feet to her. Her face was pale, eyes half shut. He felt for her wrist, a pulse, weak but there. She was breathing, barely. He didn't think about the chemicals, or what could explode next, or what would happen to him if he stayed even 5 seconds longer. He just knew he had to get her out. He wrapped one arm under her shoulders, the other beneath her knees, lifted with everything he had. She was light but dead weight. He staggered to his feet, body screaming from the smoke, vision blurring, shoulders on fire, but he moved, step by step. The door was a blur, the light outside was blurry, everything stung, but he kept going. As he reached the hallway, someone screamed. Then hands grabbed Emily from him and others caught Jayden before he hit the floor. Everything turned white, then black, then nothing. The beeping was the first thing he heard. Soft, steady. Like a metronome. Slow, too slow at first. Jayden opened his eyes to a white ceiling and the harsh buzz of fluorescent lights. His mouth was dry and his throat burned like he'd swallowed sand. He tried to move, but his right shoulder screamed, so he stopped. A nurse noticed and came over quickly. She smiled gently and told him he was safe, that he was at Macon Regional Medical Center. She said his burns were 2nd degree, mostly on his right arm and part of his shoulder. She said they were treating him and that he'd be okay. She didn't say anything else. Jayden nodded, or tried to. Everything felt heavy. He let his head fall back onto the pillow. It took hours before his mom was allowed in. Deborah Carter walked in fast, her work uniform still on, eyes swollen and red from crying all night. Her hair was pulled back but messy, like she hadn't bothered to look in the mirror. She went straight to Jaden's side, dropped into the plastic chair and grabbed his unbandaged hand with both of hers. She didn't speak at first, just held it and closed her eyes. Then she said in a whisper so raw it almost cracked, "Baby, what were you thinking?" Jaden looked at her, at the pain in her face, the fear, the love. He wanted to say something smart, something to make her smile, to take the weight off her shoulders like he always tried to do. But all he could say was the truth. "She was going to die, Mom." Deborah pressed her lips together, then nodded slowly. Her hand tightened around his. She leaned in and kissed his forehead, staying close. "You saved her, Jay. You really saved her." He didn't answer. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired, sore, and oddly empty. The next day, Miguel came. Jaden was propped up now, drinking juice through a straw. Miguel burst into the room like a ball of energy that didn't know where to go. "Dude, you're awake," he said, voice loud but shaky. "You're on the news, like real news. Channel 7. They said a student saved another student from a fire. That was you. They didn't say your name, though, just a student worker. I had to tell like 5 people at school it was you. You should have seen their faces, man." Jaden raised one eyebrow, trying to smile but too exhausted to keep it up. "Guess it's not every day the janitor runs into a fire." Miguel sat down at the edge of the bed, looking at his friend, really looking. The bandages, the tubes, the quiet. "You scared the hell out of me," he said, softer now. "I thought I'd lost my best friend." Jaden blinked slowly. "I didn't think, I just went." Miguel didn't answer. He just nodded and looked down, drumming his fingers against the edge of the hospital bed. Meanwhile, across town, in a different part of the hospital, Emily Hastings was awake. She had come too slowly, confused at first, surrounded by machines and a family in panic. Her mother had cried, her father had cursed the school under his breath. The doctors explained she'd inhaled too much smoke and passed out. They told her she'd been rescued, pulled from the lab by a student worker, they said. A janitor, some boy. No name given. Her father had insisted on covering any and all medical costs for the boy who saved his daughter, whoever he was. It was the right thing to do, he said. Quiet charity, no need for fanfare. Emily just nodded, still foggy, still putting the pieces together. It wasn't until the 3rd day that someone showed her the video. A student had recorded it on their phone. It was shaky and brief, but clear enough. Smoke, fire, screams, and then a figure bursting through the lab door with a girl in his arms. She watched herself be carried through smoke, limp and unconscious, by a boy with dark skin and a torn shirt, coughing as he staggered into the hallway before collapsing. A janitor's shirt still clung to one side of his arm. His face was singed, blurry through the smoke, but unmistakably brave. She watched it again and again. No one had to say his name. She knew exactly who he was now, and she couldn't believe she'd never noticed him before. The sky over Macon that morning was the same pale gray it had been since the fire, quiet, heavy, without a trace of sun. A light wind blew through the parking lot of the high school, lifting dry leaves in soft circles near the front steps. Inside, the school buzzed with the uneasy calm of a place still holding its breath. The science wing remained taped off with plastic sheets and yellow warning signs, like a wound no one dared to touch, and though the smoke was long gone, something lingered in the air. Like memory. Like guilt. Emily Hastings walked through the front entrance in a clean sweater and flat shoes, her long blonde hair tied back, a wool coat wrapped tightly around her even though the air inside wasn't cold. Her backpack was lighter than usual, not because she carried less, but because her mind was heavier. Every footstep down those halls echoed just a little louder than before, like they didn't belong to her anymore. Her friends saw her and rushed over, bright smiles, relief, voices full of questions and concern. She smiled back, hugged them, but it all felt distant, like she was watching it from the outside. They didn't know what was spinning inside her. They hadn't seen the video. They hadn't watched it again and again the way she had, slow, silent, focused, until every flicker of flame and every labored step burned into her mind. They hadn't seen the way he carried her, wrapped in smoke and grit and pain. He'd been in that fire for her, and she hadn't even known his name. Not until now. By fifth period, she couldn't take it anymore. The bell rang, and while her classmates turned toward the stairwell, Emily turned away from them. She walked past the lockers, past the cafeteria, past the familiar rows of classroom doors, and down a narrow, low-lit hallway near the back of the building. It was a hallway most students never used, quiet, with flickering lights and the faint smell of bleach. She paused at a plain gray door with a dent in the middle and a faded sign, "Custodial Storage, Authorized Personnel Only." She knocked once, then slowly pushed it open. Jaden Carter was there, back turned, sleeves rolled, restacking supplies on a metal cart. The room was small, no windows, just shelves of plastic bins, buckets, rags, bottles of disinfectant. The overhead light buzzed faintly, casting a yellow hue over everything. He didn't hear her at first. She stepped in. "Jaden." He stopped moving. When he turned around, there was a moment, a flicker of recognition, then surprise, then something unreadable in his eyes. Maybe guarded, maybe tired, but he stood a little straighter. Emily stepped further into the room. Her voice trembled at first, but she steadied it. I didn't get to thank you." Jaden's gaze didn't shift. He looked at her like someone trying to measure if this was real or just another person passing through. He didn't say anything. "I mean," she continued, "I knew someone helped me, but I didn't know it was you, not until I saw the video. You saved me. And I didn't even know your name." Jaden let out a small breath through his nose, not quite a sigh, more like a thought escaping. His shoulders were tense under the long-sleeved shirt, one arm still bandaged beneath the fabric. He finally said quietly, "Didn't do it for the thanks." "I know," Emily said quickly. "That's why it matters even more." The room fell quiet. The faint sound of students talking somewhere far away filtered in through the vents. Emily took a small step forward. "I've walked past you 100 times," she said. "Probably more. I never said a word, I never looked, but you saw me. And you didn't even hesitate." Jaden shifted his weight. He didn't look away, but his eyes softened just a little. She swallowed hard. "My dad paid your hospital bills. When they told him someone saved me, he didn't ask questions, he just said to cover it. But he didn't know who you were. None of us did." He nodded once, slow. Not surprised, just accepting. Emily pressed on. "I showed him the video. I made him watch it. And I told him that wasn't enough. Paying a bill and walking away, that's not enough for what you did." Jay didn't move. But in the stillness of the closet, the weight of her words finally landed. "I want to help," she said, "for real. I want people to know your name, not just as a janitor, not just as the kid who pulled someone out, but as you, Jaden Carter." He looked at her then, really looked. And what she saw in his eyes wasn't pride, it wasn't relief, it was disbelief slowly melting into something like hope. She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "I'm writing about you," she said, "for the paper, maybe more. I just wanted you to hear it from me first." And then she was gone. That night, in the Hastings kitchen, the table was set the way it always was, polished wood, folded napkins, silverware in perfect lines. But Emily didn't touch her plate. She sat with her hands folded, chin lowered. "Dad," she said finally, voice firm, "we need to talk about Jaden Carter." Her father looked up from his tablet. "The boy who saved you?" Emily nodded. "He didn't just save me, he risked everything. And we didn't even know who he was. We didn't see him. That's got to change." Dr. Hastings studied his daughter's face, more serious than he'd ever seen it, more alive. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to help him go to college, whatever it takes." He set down the tablet, leaned back in his chair, and gave a slow nod. "Then we'll do it right." Spring came slowly to Georgia that year, like it was waiting for something. The trees bloomed in patches, not all at once, and the air still held on to a bit of winter even as the sun began to stretch longer into the afternoons. By late April, the halls of Macon High buzzed with college decisions, final projects, and countdowns to summer break. Seniors walked taller. Juniors felt the pressure coming, and Jaden Carter, he kept pushing his supply cart just like always. Except everything had changed. Not on the surface, maybe. He still wore the same work shirt in the evenings, still swept the same hallways. But when he passed students now, they looked at him differently. Some nodded, some smiled, a few even stopped to say thank you, and when they did, Jaden would nod back, quiet and humble, never stopping long. He didn't know what to do with attention, but he did know how to keep moving forward. It was the article that did it. Emily had written it from the heart, no fancy metaphors, no drama, just the truth. The fire, the rescue, the silence, his name, his story. She titled it My Silent Hero, and when it ran in the school paper it caught on fast. Teachers posted it on classroom walls, local blogs picked it up, then the county news station, then the statewide education board. One night, while Jaden was finishing a late shift, Miguel sprinted into the gym hallway, waving his phone like it was on fire. "Bro, you're not going to believe this." Jaden raised an eyebrow, too tired to ask. Miguel shoved the screen in his face. "You're invited to speak at the State Youth Leadership Summit. They're calling you one of the most inspiring students in Georgia, and they want you on stage, with Emily and me." Jaden blinked. "Why you?" Miguel grinned. "They said positive peer influence. Guess being your loud Mexican best friend finally pays off." Jaden smirked, just a little, then nodded. He didn't want the spotlight, but he understood now it wasn't just about him. It was about what the story meant, about what it could do. The day of the summit, the auditorium at Georgia State University was packed. Students, educators, local leaders, even a few reporters. Jaden stood backstage, tugging gently at the stiff collar of the borrowed dress shirt. He wasn't used to these clothes. They felt tight, too formal, but next to him Emily looked calm, confident, her notes in hand. Miguel bounced on his heels like he'd had 3 sodas. When their names were called, applause erupted. Jade stepped out into the lights, heart pounding but feet steady. He didn't speak first, Emily did. She told the story again, not as a victim, but as a witness. She spoke about courage, about being blind to people who stand right beside you, about learning to really see. Then Miguel spoke. About friendship, about never underestimating the quiet ones, about how one act of bravery can change more than a life. It can change a direction. And then Jaden stepped forward. The microphone felt too tall, so he adjusted it down, cleared his throat. "I don't have fancy words," he said, his voice low but steady. "I'm not great at speeches, but I know what it's like to be overlooked, and I know what it feels like to do something scary, not because you're brave, but because someone needed you. I didn't run into that fire to be a hero. I ran in because no one else was going, and she was still inside." He paused. A silence swept the room. "I don't need fame," he said. "But if telling this story helps one more kid like me get seen or get help or get a shot at something better, then it's worth it." He stepped back. The applause was long, loud. Later that week, a thick envelope arrived at the Carter home. Inside was a formal letter, an offer from Georgia State University, full ride, biochemistry program, sponsored by the Hastings Foundation for Community Heroes. Jaden read the letter out loud to his mom in the kitchen, her eyes filling with tears she didn't wipe away. She pulled him close, held him like he was still a boy with scraped knees and big dreams, and in a whisper that broke a little she said, "You see, baby? You didn't just survive that fire. You walked through it, and now you're burning a path for the rest of us." That summer, Jaden, Emily, and Miguel stayed in touch. They weren't just a story anymore. They were friends, real ones. The kind that stayed when the headlines faded. The kind that showed up for birthdays, finals, and late-night talks. And sometimes, when Jaden walked past the science wing, now fully rebuilt, the walls fresh with paint, he'd pause for just a second. Not to relive the fire, but to remember what came after. Because some stories aren't about the flames. They're about who walks out of them and who chooses to go back in. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.